Apparently I'm really into making videos today, when recently I was saying, I don't know if I can continue doing this, there's no energy behind it, but it seems to be going today. And I don't want to make a long video because it's getting a little bit late and I need to do my coherence breathing and settle down. I really hope that I can sleep without any of those jolts because they kind of freak me out. But we'll see, because today was the first day I took that lipospheric vitamin C. And I had a couple insights when I was editing my last video. Nothing too major, but I was seeing that when that energy comes in so-called mania, I've talked about how it's energy to be shared, but we don't always share it. And maybe because we're not quite sure how, or we don't have people to share it with. If we were living in that state with other people, we would probably just be passing that energy back and forth, and it would be quite even. So when we can't share it, we don't know how to share it, or whatever is inhibiting the process, it causes us to accumulate energy and sort of hoard the energy for ourselves. Not necessarily intentionally, but in those states, at least in my experience, I remember finding things to actually increase the energy even more. So if I'm in mania and I listen to a song that I really like, it's going to make it even more extreme. It's going to make it augment that experience that doesn't necessarily need any help in that domain. So say I spend half an hour listening to all my favorite songs and get really pumped, versus spending half an hour sharing that energy doing something altruistic. And I'm not saying that one is right and one is wrong. It's just one is keeping the energy for oneself in a way, and the other is using that energy to create gestures of sharing. And perhaps there could be a balance between both, charging oneself up and then dissipating the energy in altruism. And perhaps we charge ourselves up, but we don't necessarily know the skill of charging and dissipating that energy and using it for what it's meant for, not necessarily just for ourselves. So when we use the energy to affirm life, then that is going with what the energy wants, because we get mad at things that don't affirm life. And I had this sense too when I was listening to the stuff I was talking about that David Bohm said, was that in the manic state, in map consciousness or trance consciousness, meaning is being decoupled from words in a way. So usually when we speak to each other, we speak English. Our thoughts and our brain are already calculating what that means. And it might not be exactly what it means, but what it means according to what we think it means. If it's something somebody says or something like that, we always have a sense of what that means. And so when meaning starts getting decoupled from words, when we're more in touch with actual meaning, in contact with that, then we create words based on being in touch with that meaning, not just meeting words with words, meeting the meaning and creating words. And that's why it can seem kind of nonsensical, and not that's why, as in that's the only thing. Of course not, I've said a million things. And how that's also relevant is that the me is just a bunch of words that we've collected and stories that we tell ourselves. So when meaning is decoupling from words, and we're just a bunch of words, we're actually decoupling from our ego self and being in touch with that meaning and giving voice to that instead of perceiving and making meaning based on past meanings. The brain always knowing what things mean. All of a sudden the brain is in this state of not knowing what things mean and seeing that they're not really any things. It's just the moment fluxing and flowing and creating words with that. So the meaning is decoupled from the words and it goes into the moment. The meaning is the moment. And then when we speak as that meaning in the moment, it's a lot different than speaking as what the ego's making meaning of as the moment, which is the past, because we're getting all that meaning as our equations from the past. So we speak the meaning of the moment, and it's speaking non-locally in a way, because we usually speak from this localized center, the ego. But when we're speaking as the moment, we're not sure what our perception has caught on to, what it has become aware of. It could be anything in the whole field, and speaking as that relationship with that which we perceive, and not as this center of the past experience, which can only meet a very small fragment of the totality of the moment. So each moment is such a huge infinity, and when we speak as the ego and perceive as that, we pick out a very narrow bit. Even if we're in direct perception, we can still only pick out a small bit of the infinity of each moment. But it's still infinitely larger than what the ego picks out. And I feel like the current world, we live in the order of words, which is the order of the me, but it's just a bunch of words and what we think those words mean, and that limits our worldview. And so perception without words creates a different order. And when I say being in connection with the meaning of the moment, it's still subjective. It's not necessarily objective, but it's a completely different subjectivity than the ego. And perhaps that's what Dr. David Hawkins talks about when he talks about radical subjectivity. And in the manic mode of language, we have fun with language, we play with language. There's a manic mode of language, there's a manic order of language, and language for a manic worldview. And I was watching some of my music, meaning a friend gifted me G-Force Visualizer and recommended that I watch it on full screen. So I did that just now with some of my songs, and it was pretty amazing. It's very intricate and beautiful and so rich and always changing and fluxing and flowing. And then I was thinking, imagine if we saw the universe that way, not just conceptually but actually, as always changing, beautiful, fluxing and flowing. And when I was watching all this richness of design change and go through metamorphosis and change color, and I'll show you some, but what I was thinking is that I noticed that my mind couldn't really pick out favorites. It was just so changing that once a favorite came up, it was gone. And between that and 10 seconds later, there might be 10 favorites. And so by the time the 10th one comes along, I've forgotten about the first 5. So it was like my brain couldn't cling on to anything because it was so rich and diverse and changing. And in a way, reality must be something like that, because it is rich and diverse and changing. But with our thought structures, we've limited it down to something so small, mainly based on what I like and what I don't like. Preference, reward, punishment. So these dualities, when really it's such a richness. And I feel like in map consciousness, we see it as this richness that's ever changing and is so dynamic that we don't even have time to think in terms of like and dislike. And like and dislike is all based on our past memories. So there's no time for even memory to come in to the equation. And Krishnamurti talks a lot about perceiving without memory. So all I could do is just watch and enjoy. And I'll show you a few of my favorite songs, G-Force style. context in dialogue, and we can also live it. Not just sharing context in dialogue, but living in that richness. Because it's a living energy that we all share. And that richness of perception has been stolen from us. And we're sold these patterns of goals and ideals and programs. So I got through a lot today. I still have quite a number of pages to go, but at this rate, I should get through them in a week or so, perhaps. It would be cool to have them done by the time I'm off medication, so the major part of this self-dialogue is wrapped up at the same time. And then I'll have from that time until the 20th, the 1-year mark, to go from there. I don't know what's next. It kind of changes from day to day.